Welcome back. We're starting with hurling. There's a lot to get to. Noel Connors, All-Star winning Waterford hurler, is with us. Hi, Noel.
How's it going, lads? How are you?
Yeah, very well. Tipperary 323, Clare 222. You know exactly what I'm going to first here, so let's get straight to it. Aidan McCarthy on Jake Morris. At that stage, 37 minutes gone, Clare were at a 3-point lead. It was 113 to 212, and James Owens blew his whistle, and nobody quite knew what was coming. Even the Tipperary players, I think, a bit surprised. The rule is a player should be sin-binned in hurling should he commit one of 3 cynical fouls inside the 20-metre line or semicircle that prevents a goal-scoring opportunity. So the rule doesn't say a really good goal-scoring opportunity, a great one. It just says a goal-scoring opportunity. Owens looked at it and said, well, he's got a bit of a run, admittedly at an angle, in at goal here, and that was his logic.
Yeah, but there's a great question to start. Yeah, look, I suppose a lot of it is the language I think used around, and I think that Jackie and him spoke about it at half time and after the match around the new rules. If it was a clear goal scoring opportunity, well then no, obviously not. But was it a goal scoring opportunity in a broad sense? Potentially, we don't know unless it was run through. There's probably been a lot of criticism over the last 24 hours about James Owens, and look, I know it was probably the wrong decision at the time, but you know, who really wants to be a referee? There's certainly a lot of calls over the last number of years for support, and potentially this is the opportunity to do it.
Oh, I think you've gone. We will take a clip of Brian Lohan. Here was Brian talking afterwards.
Look, I don't know where the referee got his interpretation. I'd say the only man in the ground that saw a goal scoring opportunity out of that. Aidan thought went for the ball, mistimed the tackle, but how he called a penalty and sent one of our men off. Just very frustrated with it.
So this is the worst case scenario, in that James Owens has the rule written down and interprets it in this way, but the rule does leave that interpretation open to happening. Like, Owens isn't here, so I'm going to defend him a little bit. It's not a great decision. It was certainly a foul. You know, you're saying we'd have to run the play out and see would Jake Morris have a goal chance. Well, James Owen doesn't have that luxury. He doesn't have the luxury of several replays over. He judged it that if Morris gets by that tackle, he's in a bit of an angle, but he'll get a shot away. He'll get a shot away at goal. That's a goal scoring opportunity. That's the rule. What do you want from me?
You know what? It's one of those things which we always kind of discuss within the GA, and maybe it's a good thing we're all completely invested in the organisation and obviously in the sports. Whatever a million members are close with, so 1 in every 4 is a GA member apparently. So we all have some say in it. Okay, so any kind of small, or in this case quite large incident, we all feel like we have the right answer. And look, it possibly was the wrong decision, but again, if you're writing these rules, there can be no room for interpretation. It needs to be very clear cut. Perhaps if there was I know they say the 21 metre or outside the semicircle, but then again, I think there needs to be a bit more kind of meat on the bones really to say if it's a clear cut goal or a clear cut foul.
Like in football, for instance, soccer, they talk about the last man. There's a bit more clarity there. There is a vagueness about this rule which they may have to address here.
Yeah, and look, we saw it as well. We saw it again with Peter Casey just before it, or just after. This was in with the Limerick match. And again, was that a clear-cut goal? I don't think so. As far as I can remember from watching that, I think there was 5 people actually behind, we'll say, the man that was running in. So there was 5 people in front of him. So was that a sin bin? Was that a goal-scoring opportunity? Again, possibly the answer is no. So in the space of, we'll say, 2 matches, we're discussing the same rule.
And Barry Heffernan's foul and Aaron Shanaher was picked out as an example as well that wasn't given. So I think this will continue across the summer. I mean, yesterday's one was probably especially obvious to everyone that really, you know, like, this is not what the rule is trying to stop, a moment like this. But I mean, if that foul happens, Aidan McCarthy on Jake Morris, if that happens another 10 metres closer to goal, then you have a few more people probably saying, oh, well, maybe James Owens has a point here. That's why this gets so kind of tricky and so down to interpretation.
And look, I think it kind of all boils down to, like, the referee is human. He's a GA person like everyone else. And I think we're going to get no satisfaction in and trying to criticise James Owens. I was very fortunate to be on an all-star trip with him, and I had a number of conversations, and he's the most genuine, honest person that you could ever come across in your life. So
yeah,
I think it's time to take a bit of heat off James and realise that maybe it's just the way in which the rule is wrote.
Oh.
And I think, and the way in which you look at that as well is if you actually watch it back and you watch the expression on players' faces, a lot of them actually didn't understand what was going on.
No.
So for me, like that's the biggest kind of red flag. If your players don't really understand the rules because it's very difficult for them to interpret them, well, then there's a bit of an issue there.
Yes. If you write rules in such a way that the rules allow for bad interpretations, then in the white heat of being down there and having a crowd and having to make up your mind pretty quickly, you're going to have bad interpretations.
Absolutely. And look, it was a very intense game, and it was up and down the field, and that obviously adds to the occasion as well. And we have to realise that James Owens has also been, essentially examined on the sidelines as well by, referees. So he has to make sure that if there is an opportunity there to try these new rules out, he's probably been tested on that as well. So whilst we always go back to the penalty, it's not just a singular individual thing that you need to look at. There's a broader context here which you have to bring into play as well.
Tipperary won that sin bin period 2-4 to 2 points. Like, it really did swing the game, which is one of the other reasons people are so upset about it in Clare, I think. For Liam Sheedy, he stuck with the old guard. There was a lot of talk in Tipperary in the build to this game about giving younger players their chance, and there was a sense that Sheedy was sticking with the older players, and Tip needed more pace and a bit more youth and a bit of verve and everything else. It worked out for him yesterday for sure. Where are Tipperary, do you think, as they head towards the Munster final now against Limerick?
Do you know what? I was only thinking about it this morning. It's Tipperary need just a little boost, and all of a sudden, before you know it, they could be 3 or 4 or 5 points ahead of you, and it's going to be very, very similar when it goes into a Munster final. Tipperary are hard bet in the final, so they'll take a lot of energy, a lot of momentum going forward. They have absolutely nothing to lose, which is absolutely bananas when you think about Tipperary tradition against Limerick. So they'll definitely enjoy the occasion. And whilst we'll say there's a lot of fellas there with miles on the clock, with that you also have a hell of a lot of experience. So I think that from both sides of the coin, I think that Tipperary will be quietly happy and pleased going into a Munster final where they're already essentially wrote off.
Dublin 118, Galway 114. Really got the weekend off to an exciting start. So nobody saw this coming. Dublin's league form didn't suggest this was coming. They beat the teams you would think are generally regarded as being beneath them, and they very much lost to anyone above them. So they sprung no shocks in the league whatsoever, and then pitched up at Croke Park and were great in many ways. They had a plan, they stuck to it. Good off puck-outs, 2 men free in defence. Alan Nolan made some good saves, took their goals well. Chris Trummy's goal, nobody tracked him. Shane O'Neill of Galway said, "It's too easy and lazy to say Galway lacked hunger. We created an awful lot of chances. The fact that they weren't taken had nothing to do with hunger." And there were 11 wides in the first half. I think of 22 chances in the first half, Galway only took 6 of them. So there is something in what he's saying there. It's too easy and lazy to say Galway lacked hunger. We created an awful lot of chances. We just didn't take them. And yet, everybody is also saying there was a flatness about them. There still was something there. It may not have been down to a lack of hunger, but they did not arrive in Croke Park anywhere close to where Galway can be.
No, but and you know what? I was very fortunate. I was up there at the game, so I got to see it firsthand.
Right.
And whilst everyone can say, as Shane said there, like that, you can say that they're flat or they weren't up for the game. To be honest, it was probably Dublin's best performance that I've seen in a long, long time. They were so well organised, so well drilled. And probably the best example of that was when Chris Crummy scored a goal. The first thing he did was he just ran straight back down the field about 60 yards.
Yeah.
And I was kind of saying to myself, these are a well-oiled machine at this stage. With a lot of experience as well. We forget about like the likes of Owen O'Donnell, the likes of Nolan on goal, the likes of Rush, Crummy, all these people, all these lads have been through, a hell of a lot of games over the last maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 plus years. So they know how to win as well, and they know how to bring it to a battle. But I've never ever seen a Dublin team as organised, probably since Dalo's time.
Right.
And the one thing I would say is their midfield of Ryan McBride and also Conor Burke were absolutely phenomenal. Both of them were obviously from St. Vincent's. They played a lot together, and you could actually see it. So I thought Conor Burke was absolutely phenomenal, particularly with the last 15 minutes where Galway kind of got a small bit of momentum. He must have got on about 5 or 6 or 7 balls in the last 5 minutes and really kind of turned them over. But they played this kind of really nice offensive type sweeper in front of Liam Rush, so it allowed Liam at times to kind of stick tight onto the man, but also then at times when they were under a small bit of pressure, Connor went back in behind Liam and created nearly like a line of 3 through the centre, which, you know, Galway kind of struggled with at times.
If Galway want to make an All-Ireland final now, so they'll be thrown out potentially to the qualifiers if they're drawn in the first round on the 17th of July. They'll have a match on the 24th. They'll have a match a week later again on the 31st. They'll have a match again a week later on the 7th. That's 4 on the bounce, a gap week, and then the final on the 22nd of August. 5 games in 6 weeks, potentially. You'd still, Noel, be very in touch with the demands on a modern GAA player. Is 5 in 6 weeks even doable?
Do you know what? Physically, I don't think it'll be an issue.
Right.
Mentally, possibly it'll take its toll there. It's more about the journey. It's about the process of getting up for games, but also it's nearly the coming down off games is the hardest thing when you're exhausted, you're tired. Because in the be a small bit cranky as well.
In the round robin, I was going to say, we often saw teams suffer in that third week in a row.
Absolutely, and do you know what? With, I suppose, the championship mode, and we're starting to see more and more supporters going in, that's also going to add a small bit of stress and anxiety as well to players, because there's a lot more conversation now about it, and we can also hear them in the stadium, which is great. But from a player's perspective, it also adds, you know, a different element. But it's going to be incredibly difficult. Now, don't get me wrong, can they do it? Absolutely. They have an absolute phenomenal bench. But they also have lads that are young and fit and physical. So can they do it? I'd have no worries if Galway got to the Ireland final, and I wouldn't have any kind of qualms saying about it now.
Yeah, the semi-final will be that 4th week in a row. Did you say that you get cranky?
Yeah, like, you know, if you think about it, like it's very challenging. You know, you're building up every week to play a match, and all of a sudden the match is over in the blink of an eye, and then you're down and you're trying to get recovery, you're trying to get your sleep, you're trying to eat, and then you're kind of going back again, and you have to do it all over again. So it's a bit of a challenge, but in fairness, I see a few of the backroom team that Galway have. They've likes of Declan O'Connell, I think, doing into psychology. So probably Tony Oga is probably helping out as well. So these are lads that, you know, with a lot of experience, they'll know how to press the right buttons and definitely get the lads up for the game. So
did you feel they were up for the game on Saturday? Because I know you're talking about how well Dublin played, but when we're talking about Galway getting up for a game, to my eye, to a lot of people's eyes, this was not rabid Galway ready to go and fight for every ball in every moment. Did you feel they were up for it on Saturday? I actually did, and the reason I'd say that is because I was actually watching the warm-up. Dublin had, it was nearly like, I'm not trying to be funny in any shape or form, but Dublin must have had about 100 cones in the field, and Galway literally had 12. And when Galway came out, they got out and they were passing. It was very crisp, very sharp, and they just looked relaxed. They looked ready. They looked really ready for the game. So I don't think that you can say that they weren't up for the game. Anyone that runs down in front of Croke Park, regardless if there's 8,000 people or there's no one there, if you're not ready for a game in Croke Park, well, there's no point in actually putting on the jersey. So I think that's probably, I think their manager said it was probably a lazy comment. Yeah. And I think he's right. Well, they're going to be hearing it plenty, I'd say, for the next couple of weeks until they get out again. Kilkenny 237, Wexford 229. So this was epic stuff. And there was a passage of play which was just frenetic, hits, balls being dropped, referee letting it flow. Cody afterwards, I loved the quote. He hailed the honest to goodness physicality of the game. So after a league campaign where people said there were too many frees, this was a nice return to proper championship action. Davy Fitzgerald felt Wexford were the better team over the first 70 minutes. What was your read on the first 70? I actually, when I was watching the match, I actually felt nervous myself because the match was so good. Yeah. And that, you know what, that was the first time in a long time where I actually sat on the edge of my seat and I couldn't actually move. It was absolutely brilliant. Personally, I felt that, I felt that Wexford at times overplayed the pass. But I think that deep down, I think Kilkenny knew what they were doing. So far, Wexford's pockets, Kilkenny had nobody within Wexford's 45. So it took, we'll say, the full back maybe to bring it to someone running off from half forward. So it would have taken someone like Conor McDonald, Ali Chin, and maybe even someone like a Rory O'Connor coming out from the full forward line to collect the ball on the 45 and start making runs. And it's very, very challenging to try and keep that momentum for 70 minutes. So in fairness to Cody, he had his work done. Whilst Wexford probably got on the ball more very early on within the first, we'll say, quarter, Kilkenny had 3 chances, and if the ball was passed inside one more time, there would have been goal opportunities. Right. So whilst they had the possession, Wexford, they probably didn't make the most of it. The Kilkenny supporting cast played their part as well. So TJ Reid, 34 years old now. Cody was hailing his fitness afterwards. 16 points in total, but just 4 from play. And this is a high-scoring game in the end. This is 237 on the board. So he had 16 in total, but just 4 from play. Like, it's very notable. Owen Cody's popping up with 1-5. Walter Welch with a goal off the bench. I just had a look at their subs. So they made 9 substitutions across the course of the game. Of their 9 subs, every single Kilkenny sub except for 2 scored.
Isn't just the first thing when you said that to me? Isn't that just typical Kenny? Yeah, you know what? I was really intrigued to watch TJ, and the thing about him is he wins so much ball. But what he does is, and I've actually seen Shamie Callanan doing it really well over the weekend. He passes off the ball every time to the best man in the position. So he could see someone running, and he's not one bit selfish. It's a pop to someone, and it's over the bar. So despite the fact that he didn't score, 5 to 10 points for play, he still probably contributed, 3 or 4 times that.
Right.
But you know what? That kind of also reminded me of the time that they talked about Henry Shefflin's best match, and it was the time he never scored from play. It was just that he was getting over ball, he was winning dirty ball, and he was handing ball off. So that was exactly what TJ done. And in fairness to him, he was been tightly marked by Matt Hannon for the whole match.
A word on Limerick before you go. So they beat Cork by 8 points, 222 to 117. Cork had scored goals in the league. Shane Kingston scores an early goal. We think, right, we might be onto something here, and then it didn't quite materialise. Limerick scored 2 goals just before the break. Kyle Hayes with a great finish for his one, and that was 6 points up. Cork kind of seemed to get back into it a touch in the second half, but had a few bad wides and gave away their momentum at that stage. Limerick maybe played in spells. So for Limerick, that's kind of a routine 8-point win into a Munster final. They didn't, it seems, have to extend themselves massively.
No, but you know what? I think that the one thing about Cork is it was probably the best and the most enjoyable Cork game that I watched in a long time. They looked very organised, but also what they had was a lot of runners.
Right.
It kind of reminds you of, we'll say, the Ben, Jerry O'Connor type era, where they had fellas running off the shoulders and at really good angles, where they were popping balls. And at times Limerick were in 6s and 7s. Which was really good to see as well. But I wouldn't kind of be too concerned about Cork. I think that they're in a pretty good position. This is a pretty young team, and they are building. But I do think that they'll still have a say in the championship yet. With Limerick, it's probably the same conversation that we've been having for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Physical, very direct. They know exactly what they're doing, and each person to a man knows their role inside out, regardless if you're number 1 or you're number 26 that comes on. They've been just so well drilled over the last couple of years. It's really, really interesting to watch. But I was just looking at some of the stats. Limerick kind of tried to nearly want the opposition to have the puck out, because they score more from the opposition's puck out than they do from their own, which I found really, really interesting. So even last year, I think they scored 228, so 34 points from their own puck out, but they scored 138 from the opposition, so they scored 41 points. Which is really, really interesting. That's something that Paul Kinnerk, I think, brought to Clare when they won it back in 2013. So it's a really, really interesting strategy that will push up and will press, and once that the puck out is given, they all kind of jump on where the ball is and they kind of get in there and rucks and win the ball.
So they press high in a way maybe that Cody and Kilkenny didn't so much against Wexford.
But you also have the platform where they have a really, really strong, high, tall half backline that are very, very good in the air. So once the ball kind of goes to the half backline or maybe even the full backline midfield, they can still, cover a lot of ground, both in the air and on the ground, obviously, to get back if they need to. So they have all their angles kind of covered. And Paul Kinnerk apparently is at the top of his game, and he's meant to be an amazing person to work with. So he's really starting to instill that in Limerick over the last couple of years. Okay, very good. Qualifiers are going to be interesting. Noel Connors of Waterford. Thanks so much, Noel. Thanks a million, lads.